Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel, Making It in Austria. I'm your host, Adela Mehijanic. Greetings from lovely Vienna. And today I have a great pleasure to talk to Kaitlyn Chang. Kaitlyn, welcome to our YouTube channel.
Hi, Adela. Thanks for inviting me.
Always a pleasure. So I've been waiting to, have this chat with you, and we finally have it now. Kaitlyn, let's start with a short introduction of what would you like to tell our viewers? Who's Kaitlyn?
So, who's Caitlyn? That's always a complicated question. But yeah, I like to start with I'm a mix of, let's say, three cultures. So I'm born Korean, South Korean. I was born in Seoul, and then I grew up in the US. And then I went back to Korea to work, but then somehow life and fate led me in 2012 to come work in Austria. So that's already 9 years ago, right? Yeah. And so since then, I've been on and off in Austria. And that's why I think now, yeah, about 1/4 of my life has already been in Austria. Oh my God. Another 1/4 in the US and half in Korea. So that's why I'm a sort of mix of these three cultures altogether. I work as brand innovation lead currently at Accenture Interactive, and that's where I do marketing, innovation, consulting, and yeah, so I am, let's say, very passionate about things like creativity, about things like innovation, doing something differently, because that's also sort of linked with creativity. And that's where my work lies, more or less. And the third topic that I'm very passionate about is diversity and inclusion, because probably because of my personal background, right? So I've been living in so many, let's say, different cultures as the other person per se. So for such a big part of my life, and that's why sort of having a fair chance or giving fair chances to everyone, disregards of where they come from or what they look like, what they believe in. I really believe that that's a very, very important topic, and I also believe that that's actually sort of empowers creativity and innovation also in a way, and enables it. And so yeah, so those three are the topics that I'm very interested in.
So how does your daily business look like? So how can we imagine, you said your title brand in innovator, right? So what does it mean for people who never heard about it?
Well, so it's basically a form of, let's say, marketing consulting. Before I've worked, so about total of 17 years in marketing and advertising. And before I joined Accenture, I did that actually at the beginning of last year. Before that, I was always in creative agencies, so advertising agencies. And that's where you basically make ads, right? And that's where you think about, okay, if there's a product or a brand that, a company wants to make it known and sell more, then how do you communicate about it to the market? How do you make people understand what you're selling? How do you make people sort of want to buy it and want to use it and want to try it out? And that's what I've been doing for the past, let's say, years. And now it's a bit more developed into adding even more innovation in there. So how can we use technology and the new, let's say, innovations that so abound these days in the world to be able to even help marketing and advertising to sort of become, let's say, more effective or even more, let's say, powerful or even more interesting and engaging. And that's what I'm focusing on. So I would basically be, let's say, consulting our clients when they have a marketing or communication problem, and then say, okay, so maybe we want to look at it in a different way. Maybe we want to solve it with this kind of innovation. These days, I'm also very much involved in, for instance, e-commerce, web shopping. How can we make the experience for our customers, let's say, a lot more engaging with new technologies and also adding their creativity? So how do we tell our story better, even on e-commerce channels, for instance? So those are sort of the things that I work on day to day with my clients.
So how do you see the future of, or near future of your industry, like marketing and communication? How does it going to change with this pandemic and in the next years?
Well, one of the key things, of course, is, it's going to be so much more digitalized. And what I see as really, really interesting is that I used to sort of be the digitalization advocate in marketing in Austria. And until before the pandemic, it was always like, sort of received as, of course, the Asian girl who comes from Asia, the land of IT. I used to work for Samsung before for 10 years, and that's why a lot of what I used to do had to do a lot with, new technologies and new stuff. And that's why I was always like, oh, let's try something new. And then it would be received as, yeah, but you talk now, but that's not going to happen in the near future in Austria too soon. But then Corona happened. um, and I'm actually, of course, the whole, let's say, everyone who sort of, got sick or died, or the families of that, of course, it's a terrible, terrible thing, the
Yes.
pandemic. But in terms of digitalization, I think it couldn't have been a better chance for the entire world to become more digitalized. And I think that, even for instance, things like e-commerce, we've always been saying, yes, e-commerce will be
Yeah.
there, will be more generalized and diplomatized and all that, but it just didn't happen, and it was always met with this chasm. But now
Mm.
with Corona, everyone sort of has had to get used to all these new sorts of ways of living in the digital world, right?
Mm.
And I think that's really fascinating in the sense that it's changing our habits so much. Even our moms, our grandparents can now go online and then buy something. My father-in-law is almost 80, and now like he is like a professional in terms of Zoom meetings now,
Wow.
because he's still doing some mentoring things, etc. And
Yeah.
so I think that's actually really fascinating. And also from the sense of marketing, that means your entire, let's say, market or your entire group of customers are developing completely new ways of life and new habits, right? And so how do you then talk to them better in this era? I think that's a really, really interesting topic.
Mm.
Yeah.
Pivoting now a little bit to Austria, you moving to Austria. So you said
Mhm.
like 1/4 of in the US and 1/4 here in Austria. Can you compare US and Europe, or what can you compare and what what is missing?
Interesting question. Um,
Brings me back to our MBA days when there was always this topic. Yes, in
yeah,
Europe we don't take the risk. Yes, in the US they just go and wild after the risks.
yeah. Well, so I think let's say, one of my biggest pet peeves that I had in the very beginning when I started living in Austria was actually, um, you know, there is a stark difference, right? There's a stark difference in terms of, let's say, the entrepreneurial spirit, or the creativity or the diversity, which is very, very, let's say, one of the key values of the American culture and the American
Mhm.
society, tends to be, let's say, a bit more dampened or met a bit more, let's say, conservatively in Europe, which I don't think there is any, let's say, good or bad. It's just that it's different. And for me, as an Asian person who grew up in the US, it was actually really interesting because for me, until I came to Austria, I thought, interestingly, that all of the Western world, so not the Eastern world,
Mhm.
were somehow like the US, right? I thought every Western world was, full of creativity and entrepreneurship, and yay, we go and try something new and all of that. And then that's why I think the first time when I came to Austria was one of, the most, let's say, cultural shock for me, was that I realized that no, it's actually almost as if like Asia would be on this
Yeah.
end, and then US is on this end, and then there's another, let's say, like a triangle, and Europe is in the middle, right? So And that was actually really interesting for me. And that's why I think at first I really struggled, because I had expected that Europe would be exactly like, the US. But in so many incidences, it was very, very different, and I had to get used to it. Even in terms of, let's say, talking to people, or getting to know people, or networking with people, that's also all very different. Sometimes even more closer to Asia than, let's say, to the US, ways of, let's say, living or connecting or working. Um, and I think it's really interesting. And what's also very interesting is, however, what I see is really during COVID, all of that change, or all of those, let's say, differences have somehow sort of become less and less, the gap sort of, especially in terms of, the readiness for digitalization and all of that. So I think that's a very positive change that I'm starting to see, which probably, yeah, happened because of fate. But as a whole, the world is sort of becoming more or less, let's say, um, together homogeneous in terms of being ready for new changes, and being less scared to try out new things. So I think that's cool. Yeah.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing. You're one of the guests that I wanted to ask this, since you have that rich cultural background. You mentioned meeting people, getting to know people, networking. Tell us a little bit how you build up your network here, and how do you build up your network in general, professional wise and as well private?
Um, I think that was one of, I think that's a really good question, because when I first came to Austria, that was also something that sort of really seemed like, for me as well, like this big black box of secrets, right? Because you always hear, in Austria, networking is so important, but how? Where do you start? You go to an event, you know nobody. Like, what are you supposed to do, right? Um, and I think what I can share is maybe, the fact that, a few keywords, like, you just have to start, and you have to start sort of strategically. I think that's what's important. So you can't just, say, okay, I know, and I've heard so many times that it's so important in Austria to network. That's why I'm just going to go to every single event possible, and then just sit there and try to make small talk with whoever, because many Austrians, would be, let's say, very sort of reluctant to talk to you for a long time if they don't know you at all, or no one, if they don't know you or a mutual person. And so it's not like in some other cultures where you can just literally go up to anybody and start introducing yourself, and then you have this full elevator speech, and then people are so interested and you keep in touch. It usually isn't like that, right? So, and for me, it also took a long time to sort of learn that. And in the very beginning, however, I started, with, I think my first, let's say, one of the first things that I started was to think about, okay, how or where could I go, where I could maybe find a bunch of people who could be interested in the same things that I'm interested in, and I could also learn a lot from them. And for me, in the very beginning in 2012, that was TEDx Vienna. And that was literally the first year that I was here. And when I first came here, it was because of this, like, executive training program by Samsung. And what they do is, it's actually really cool. They like select about like 200 people per year out of the entire world. And then they send you to a completely random country. And it's it's actually really cool, because the whole year you're completely funded. You get a house, you get a car, and you don't have to go to work. And you can go to all these travels around in the country that you landed in. And all you have to do is write some reports. And if you want to take language courses, it's all funded. It's completely funded. But the only catch is, if you have family, you're not allowed to bring your family with you. You're supposed to go there alone. and you're not allowed to leave the country. They check your passport, sort of in Korean style, right? Um, and but outside of that, you're completely free to do whatever you want within that whole year, right? And so it's
Wow.
sort of like a sabbatical, but it's to encourage you to sort of learn the culture, build up your network, and then somehow prepare yourself to do business there in the future.
Wow.
So that was a really cool thing, and I got selected. And then what's funny is that the country that you get sent to is completely random, so you can't choose it.
Mhm.
And if you do get selected for something, then you have to go, right? If you say,
Mhm.
oh, like, I don't like that country, then it's like, okay, I'm going to quit. So that's why, I just waited. And in my interview, people are like, so like, even if you got selected to go to Nigeria, would you go? It's one of like a very difficult country to live in as somebody who knows no one there and doesn't speak the language apparently. And I was like, why not? It sounds really exciting. And when else would I be able to live there for a year? And then like the COO, the global COO at that time was like, ha ha ha, yeah, that's the spirit. Okay, you're in. Right? And then I find out that I get to go to Austria, right? And it's actually really funny because until then, I was like, I hear, okay, like, so you are going to go to Austria. I'm like, great. Where exactly is that on the map? Like, sounds about Europe.
Australia?
um, and of course, I didn't speak a word of German. I learned French at school. I actually studied French for like 7, 8 years. I even majored French literature along with psychology in university. Completely useless now. And so literally I spoke no German and knew nobody, and then I just came by myself, right? And then you're supposed to somehow build up your network. And that's why I was like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? Like, where do I start? And what I knew back then was, this is 2012. So back then, TED was still a very, very new kind of thing. And it was really, inspiring. It still is, but it was very new back then. Um, TEDx Vienna was also about like only 3 years old, 2 years old. And so I went to Vlad, so the whole organization team, which back then, right now it's like hundreds of people, right? Back then it was just like a bunch of 10 people. And I asked Vlad if we could meet. And I told him, I would really, 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 really like to volunteer for TEDx. And I've worked for Samsung and I've done this and this and this. I'm really interested in new technology and innovation, and I really want to volunteer, right? Although I have like zero event planning experience and whatnot. And I don't speak German and I don't know anybody. And it was actually really interesting because then Vlad did like a 2-hour interview with me. It was really long, maybe 3 hours even. Um, and then he made it really difficult, right? And then he was like, so at the very end, okay, Caitlyn, so I think you would be ready to be on the team. And so that's how I joined the team, where there were, a lot of really cool people, all these, the IT nerds and, these TEDx guys and the startup people. Um, and that was sort of my, let's say, first starting door in terms of, meeting a bunch of people where I sort of can start legitimately,
Mhm.
because then I do have a task. I have something to do, and I could also, let's say, contribute with some of the things that I already knew. From Samsung, for instance, I could also utilize my Samsung network
Mhm.
to be able to, create sponsorships, etc.
Yeah.
And that's how I started. And then what I realized is that it just helps so much more in Austria, especially in terms of networking, if you sort of have that sort of a starting point, and then it just really grows like a tree branch from there. And then you get to know people, you get to know other people, especially when you have something to do, right? So it's not like you're just there to make small talk, but you are there because of a purpose, to make something, and then it literally grew from there. Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you said with, not being an observer. So you're actively engaging and joining one network and building it up from the inside.
Exactly.
Then it's a
Exactly.
definitely different angle. So how people approach you and how you approach people. I still cannot stop thinking about this 1 year. But it's still like puzzles.
Time of my life.
And then after that program, you decided to stay in Austria, Caitlyn, right?
After that program, well, yeah, so half. I mean, like I already very much liked Austria, but then my company decided to send me soon after to be the managing director of the agency here for Austria and also for Switzerland and CE markets. So that's how I started to be at first as an expat from Samsung. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
a couple of years now.
Yeah.
One other
Long time ago.
long time ago. So that's how the story starts. One other thing that I always also like to ask is mentoring. Is about mentoring, definitely. So if you had mentors in your career, and so what's your experience? Would you recommend it? How did you find them, or they found you?
Yeah, I've had a lot of mentors, I think, in my entire life, and especially in my career. And some of the, let's say, most important mentors that I've had was actually right before I came to Austria. And this is still like a relationship that I really am very, very thankful for, because that was, I think back then I was in my late 20s and, thinking, oh, now my life is over. I'm going to be soon 30. Oh my God, like now the whole fun time is over and I have no idea what I'm doing with my career. I've worked a few years now, but I don't know where I'm going, et cetera, all these things, like existential midlife, like quarter life crisis. But then back then I was working on on a project at Samsung for the whole like global CMO of Samsung, and she was a woman. And she's not there anymore. She resigned, and she's now in pension. But anyway, back then, so I had a very lucky position where I had to actually lead a project that was very important for her. And therefore, we were actually talking like every week for 2 hours, had a meeting. And so I had to update her on the progress, and then et cetera, et cetera. And she then somehow sort of took me under her wing, right? And so she said, you know what, Caitlyn, I see a lot of potential in you, and I think we need to really have a lot more of women leaders. And I think you have a great potential to become one in the future. So I would really like to be able to talk to you more often. Right. And until then, I had like never really had a woman boss or a woman client, because she was actually my client, who really actively told me that kind of thing, right? I had bosses before, but most of them were men, of course. And the men bosses were, of course, also very, very nice. And a lot of them were very good mentors to me as well. But it was the first time with her that someone actually really actively took the initiative. And also she was actually a very high person, right? I considered myself really, really lucky to be able to talk to her even that often. And then she was like, let's talk even more often. And she would send me articles or send me, like, gift me a book that I could read about like leadership, female leadership, and what females do somehow like subconsciously, like the subconscious mistakes we tend to make, etc. So it's just all those things sort of added up a lot. And I think that made me also look at myself and my career in a
Mm.
completely different light than where I was before, right? And she was also the person who's completely sort of encouraged me to go on this program
Mm-hmm.
that I just mentioned, and that sort of became sort of like a life-changing moment or momentum for me. So at the end of my 20s and beginning of my 30s, and yeah, and then afterwards, of course, I've also had then other mentors, but now it's more like I'm also in a position where I'm mentoring a lot of
Mm-hmm.
other women for a few years now in mentoring programs that you also know about, like
Yeah.
Female Factor, Female Founders, and I have to say it's a really really rewarding experience.
Mm.
Probably you know it as well. It's just when you become the mentor and suddenly you're like, oh my God, I'm learning so much actually from the mentors, from the mentees. They could be my mentors as well, right? And then you also feel this really feeling of, let's say, gratitude for being able to at least help a little bit,
Yes.
to even if when you give like one little bit of advice and that sort of changes really how that person looks at a certain problem for completely differently. I think that's really, really rewarding. So
Mm.
yeah, mentoring and menteeing, everything really important, I think.
Totally agree. I just today had my one-on-one with my new mentee. Amy, if you're watching this, hi. And as you said yourself, so it's such a rewarding experience. And it's for me, I'm learning from her so much. And I'm sometimes very much reflecting. So because she's wants to be in my shoes in the coming years, and it was like, oh, okay, then I have a chance, to reflect and say the things that I never said, or taught things that I never taught. And especially with this mentoring, at least for me with my mentors, was holding the space, having this kind of safe space where we talk about everything that comes to our mind. It doesn't have to be, like now, it's not the agenda, like we go to the agenda points, but it's really about whatever comes to your mind or to her mind, and then just talking about that and introducing her to other people, initiatives, and slowly opening up, and she's slowly opening up. It's so, yeah, I can highly
It's
recommend.
yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think you might know I wrote my master thesis, the MBA
Yes,
thesis
I
on
read it.
probably you're the only one. Thank you.
I read it and
Uh,
referenced it in some cases.
Yay! Finally, somebody who no, but I wrote my MBA thesis on the topic of gender
Yes.
diversity in tech startups, right? And while I was writing that, I read so much and learned so much about, like gender bias in tech companies and what are some of the things that we can do to make it better. And one of that is actually really interestingly, so creating mentoring programs,
Mhm,
even not just within, let's say, like females, but
mhm,
also mixed, then you suddenly see that, for instance, if a male, let's say,
mhm,
boss was supposed to evaluate all these female, let's say, subordinates,
mhm,
um, in the case that normally he would, yeah, be a bit more biased and then, have like these stereotypical gender biases and whatever, that's
mhm,
all like impacting his influence, let's say, opinions about these subordinates. But then, like, every single time when let's say, a male boss was matched with a female subordinate as a mentoring sort of relationship, they started really vouching for this female subordinate
mm,
more, like
yeah,
without even knowing about it,
mm,
right? And I think that's one of the key things that really mentoring does bring, if you look at it from a bigger scale,
mm,
if you sort of create those kind of little relationships everywhere, then you start seeing that person in a much more deeper level, and you start understanding that person without the whole unconscious bias that you might have, and you start seeing really the value of that person, right? So I think that's why mentoring is in every company. You should also have it, and
yeah.
in Accenture we have it as well. It's also a female mentoring program, but even with that, I've learned so much from my like mentees, and I also have a mentor. I think it's really really important. Yeah.
Yeah, to all the viewers, if you don't have a mentor, get at least one.
Yes.
Get at
Yes.
least one. And if you're not in one networking association, whatever you are, so go and be actively engaged in at least one. So it's a missed opportunity, and don't find excuses like, yeah, it's online, everything is online, so networking can wait until we have the events and see face to face and all of that. Yeah, that's nice
Oh,
and good, but there's plenty of opportunities that you can meet people online.
it's
And
like
you
many of my mentees I've never met in person because of Corona,
same.
and still you feel so connected with them. You feel like you know them so well. And also, I really want to say, you don't have to pay to get a mentor either. If you really want to really find somebody, then find someone that you want to be like, where you want to be in a few years or whatever. If you want to learn from somebody, I've actually had experiences of people reaching out to me via LinkedIn, or just writing to me on an email. And then if the story really resonates with me, then I would say, of course, yes to having a coffee chat from time to
Yeah.
time. And I think that's also completely doable and
Yeah.
recommended. Yeah.
Thank you, Caitlyn. Now, if you get lots of LinkedIn messages, we know where it came from. Caitlyn is open for business as a
Yoo-hoo.
female mentor. So I will link the contact details from Caitlyn, and we are good to go.
I try my best. That's all I can say. Yeah.
Caitlyn, how about people who are considering now watching this channel and considering to move to Austria, no matter where they are from? So, and what would be your tips to give them to really get the best out of this experience?
Well, I think the first one is, expect the unexpected. um, because Austria is a very, let's say, Austria has a very unique culture and a very unique, let's say, mindset, which is sort of like really like an onion, I like to say. So there's so many layers to it. Which isn't all good or isn't all bad, right? It's just the way that the culture is. And I think one of the first mistakes that I see always from people, who are coming to Austria just with, I don't know, with rosy fantasies or dreams, is that they tend to be very surprised that there are so many layers, right? Or they tend to expect that it wouldn't be so much different from their own culture, and then they're shocked because it is. And and I think that's why you just have to really expect the unexpected, expect that whatever you have expected from the country may be completely different. And that's actually maybe not even just in Austria, right? That's probably in all cultures. And there's, good sides and bad sides to everything. You just have to get to know it deeper. And so I think one, expect the unexpected, and then two, prepare yourself to get to know it deeper. And one of the core things about that is, of course, you have to prepare yourself to learn German, because I think that's one of the key things that's unfortunately essential when you're an expat or a foreign person living in Austria. And if you plan to live for a longer time, then just the amount of opportunities and chances that will be available and open to you becomes just unbelievably different once you start to speak the language and when you don't. So I think that's one of the key things. And yeah, and third would be, don't be discouraged, even if it seems hard in the beginning, even if, for instance, let's say it feels really daunting. It really feels like, this closed onion where you have to go deep, but you can't find a way in. People seem somehow a bit like not interested in you or whatever. Doesn't matter if you keep trying and if you keep proving that what you can do is you do it good, and you are, bringing interesting ideas and interesting thoughts to this whole, let's say, discussion, then you will find an opening, right? And then when you find the opening, then you will get to know it deeper and deeper and deeper, and that's going to help you a lot. So yeah, don't be discouraged.
Love the comparison with the onion.
Yeah, you get to
Definitely.
cry a lot, but it's also very yummy. Yeah.
Thank you, Caitlyn, for
I'm,
sharing
I'm
this.
married to an
Yes.
Austrian, by the way.
So she knows from the first hand.
Yeah.
Caitlyn, before we wrap up our interview for today, I know you read a lot. So I follow you on Instagram, and I know that you're a bookworm. So any books that you would like to recommend to our viewers that are like must?
Mhm. Well, in terms of nonfiction, the book that I'm recommending every day these days, it's unfortunately in German, but it's Generation Haram, so
Ah,
Generation Haram by Melissa Erkut. She is a Austrian journalist and also part-time, I think, teacher as well, who actually comes originally from, I think, Bosnia, right?
yes.
Yeah, so she came, she fled the Bosnian War when she was a baby, like only 2 years old with her parents, and she grew up, let's say, more or less her entire life in Austria, and has become a respected journalist. But then even throughout this whole, let's say, career path and life path, she has also had multiple experiences of, being treated with racial discrimination and all of that. And so with that experience, personal experience, what she is really focusing on is she writes for Biba, for instance, the magazine to read if you're interested in topics like diversity in Austria. But what she also focused on was to look in schools. She calls them like the burning point schools in Austria, especially in Vienna, where there's a high ratio of, let's say, children from different backgrounds. And they are funnily and very interestingly always labeled the Brennpunktschule, so the burning schools, which I think is in itself ridiculous, because a lot of, let's say the purebred, I hate this word, but the purebred Austrian parents tend to not like it if, the ratio of, let's say, migrant children in the schools become too high, which is completely unfair, right?
Yeah.
And as a result, she looks at, all the problems in terms of, let's say, diversity and inclusion in the Austrian school system in that book. She examines it in detail, also looks at the reasons why. And what she really talks about is, well, at the end of the day, this is a social problem that we do have to solve together. We cannot just, let's say, sort of give all that problem to just the individual parents of the kids to solve by themselves, because that will take forever, right?
Yeah.
We have to take into consideration, we have to just accept the fact that actually Vienna is, one of the biggest metropolitan cities in Europe with the biggest population who are not completely Austrian, right? So it's like, it's the best city, I think, in terms of diversity and inclusion. But do we really already live with that mindset? And are we teaching our kids with that mindset? No, right? The school system is not ready for that. So she looks at all the ways in which we could really sort of change that on a social level, on a systematic level. And I think that's really, really interesting, and sort of also rings a bell to everyone. And it's thankfully become a bestseller.
Yes.
So a total recommended read. It's also very easy to read. It goes by very smoothly. So in terms of nonfiction, please read that book. um, and yeah, in terms of fiction, there's so many books that I would like to recommend, but the most recent one that I read was, it's called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, I think. And it's about a girl who sort of makes a deal with the devil. So completely different worlds, right?
Yes.
Makes a deal with the devil so that she can live forever, but in return, she will always be forgotten by everybody she meets
Wow.
immediately. Yeah, so it's a really interesting book.
And we leave it there.
Yeah, very interesting. A bit of a fantasy, but yeah, also strongly recommended. It's sort of a book that makes you really feel like it's like Christmas cookies that you like to eat a bit at a time. You enjoy it, makes you feel really good and warm. Makes you think a lot about life and the act of remembering and being remembered, and love, and yeah, it's perfect for a time like this when the weather's,
Yeah.
terrible. Yeah.
Thank you, Caitlin. So I know in Melissa's book, and what I like with is that she was, as well as you said, the teacher. So she lived through that system. So it's not someone who's
Exactly.
looking it from the outside. She actually lived and worked with the kids, so she knows what she's talking about and what is definitely
Exactly.
missing. Even though if there are so many people who object to that and say, yeah, it's not like that, or we are trying our best, but as you said yourself, it's a social
Mm,
problem, challenge,
mhm.
and it's not something that you can just kind of tell to the parents. Now you work
Exactly.
10, 12 hours.
Outsourced. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
you work 10, 12 hours, and when you come home, you can, you are
And
so
then you can now
energized.
teach your child all the
Exactly.
German that you can speak. Like,
Exactly.
no, that does not make sense,
No.
and that is not the way that it should be dealt with.
And I think this book came in the right time,
Yeah,
especially now with the pandemic, when all these issues, they just bubbled,
yeah,
and then it just was really clear. Okay, yeah,
yeah,
we all have an issue with that.
exactly.
Thank you, Caitlin. I will link
Thank you.
these books for our viewers so they can check it out. Thank you for taking the time, and this was such a insightful, casual, for me, inspiring conversation. So always happy to chat with you, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank
Oh,
you.
yes, and to all our viewers, check it out. And if you like, comment, share, subscribe with your community. And if you know someone who would like to be, featured on this YouTube channel, please let me know. Drop a comment or send me a LinkedIn message. Always looking for some inspiring people, because we want to show all the faces of Austria. Thank you all. Enjoy the day. Bye bye.